Good evening, and welcome to a very special episode of the Prince Hall Think Tank, a monthly conversation amongst Prince Hall Freemasons, where we discuss topics relative to craft masonry. My name is Brother Antonio Caffey, and I'm a very proud past master of St. Mark's Lodge number 7, located in Columbus, Ohio, where Worshipful Brother Sean Searcy now serves as Worshipful Master. Our lodge was founded in 1852 by the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Ohio, where currently the Honorable Kelvin J. Davis serves as Most Worshipful Grand Master. Before I let the other brothers introduce themselves, as always, I'd like to state that the views and opinions that are expressed by us tonight in no way reflect the views and opinions of the Grand Lodges and lodges in which we hold membership in. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to post them on our Facebook page or by using the chat option on YouTube. And if we have time at the end of the conversation, we'll try and answer some of those questions. And speaking of YouTube, always click on that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with all things Think Tank. At this time, I'll let the other brothers introduce themselves, starting with Brother Gillarm.
Hey, good evening. My name is Brother Dave Gillarm. I'm a past master of Mount Pisgah Lodge number 53, located in Columbus, Georgia. Well, we're on this past Friday. We just celebrated 130 years of existence. Um, our worshipful master for the next couple of days is Cornelius Wilson Jr. And I also have the pleasure of serving as the worshipful grand historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia, where the Honorable Bruce A. James serves as our Most Worshipful Grand Master. It's always a pleasure to be here tonight, and I believe it's going to be a very interesting show.
Thank you. Brother Morgan.
Good evening, everybody. Happy holidays. My name is James R. Morgan III, and I am a past master of Corinthian Lodge number 18, where Worshipful Brother Leroy G. McDonald II is our Worshipful Master. I have the honor and privilege of serving as the Worshipful Grand Historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia in the nation's capital, where the Honorable Quincy G. Gant is now presiding as our Most Worshipful Grand Master. I am indeed honored and privileged to be here this evening, and I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I hope you're enjoying your time with your families for the holiday season. But I want to thank you for taking time out to hang out with us here on the Prince Hall Think Tank once again. We greatly appreciate it.
All right, thank you, brothers. And Brother Collins couldn't be with us this evening, but he sends his regards. So, like I said, tonight's topic, we have a very, very special episode. Tonight's topic is the Lost Empire, Freemasonry in the Old West, which also just so happened to be the title of our very own Brother James Morgan's new book or upcoming book entitled The Lost Empire, Freemasonry in the Old West. All right, so we're going to be plugging it throughout this evening. And before we get started, and I shared this with Brother Morgan earlier, I just want to publicly say how proud we are of our brother for writing this book, for taking the time to research and everything that he put in it. And what we're going to do and talk about tonight, besides little bits and pieces of the book, because we definitely want to share some things, but we don't want to share everything because we want you all to go out and get it. But besides talking about the what's in the book, I think it's going to be very important for us to talk about the process as well, so that he can give some tips and what it took for him to write this. So without further ado, I guess the first question that I would have for the good brother is, what prompted you to even write this book?
Sure. Thank you, everybody. Again, I'm going to give you guys a shot of it again. This is the new book, The Lost Empire: Black Freemasonry in the Old West, from 1867 to 1906. And there were a couple things that really prompted me to write this book. Really, two things, and I talk about them in the book. The first being that in May of 2014, I was contacted by a woman who's become a very good friend of mine. Ms. Swanigan actually wrote an introduction to the book that you'll see when you get your copy. And she had two documents that were very interesting. As if you watch the Think Tank, that I have a real passion for family history, and particularly when family history and fraternal or Masonic history kind of intersect. And the two documents that she had, which I had no idea would change my life, were very important. One was a letter that she had from one of her uncles named John James Bruce, who in the 1860s and 1870s, really down into the 1880s, he served as a grand treasurer for the jurisdiction of Missouri. He had a brother by the name of Blanche Kelso Bruce, who was the first full-term United States senator of African descent. Okay, the first senator was Hiram Rhodes Revels, but he did not serve a full term. Senator Blanche Kelso Bruce served a full term, and this letter really didn't have much Masonic significance at all. The senator had recently been married, and his brother was writing to him about his marriage and whatnot. Really didn't have any Masonic significance, but it was written on Grand Lodge of Missouri letterhead from that time period. By Grand Lodge, I mean the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri letterhead. It was going under a different name at that time. But anyway, that was pretty easy for me to help her to understand what that was and what that meant with the letterhead is what I'm referring to. But the second document she had was very interesting and really was the first seed for this book. That second document was from the spring of 1869 from a newspaper called the Cleveland, actually published in Cleveland, Ohio, known as the newspaper was the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And it talked about another uncle of hers named Henry C. Bruce. And if you watch the Prince Hall Think Tank, I'm sure you've heard me talk a little bit about Blanche Bruce before. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned Henry Bruce in the past. If I haven't, I'm sure I will again. But Henry C. Bruce was in 1869 was shot in front of his home. And the newspaper article said that he served as the grand lecturer for the colored Masons of Kansas at that time. Notice I said colored Masons. And it also said that the gentleman that shot him, whose name in the article said George Thomas, which was an alias. His real name was Alan Pinks. Pinks, long story short, was found by Henry Bruce's Masonic brothers and was gunned down in broad daylight. And it named one of the assailants as being William D. Matthews, who is the gentleman who you see here on the cover of the book. Okay, and we've talked about William Matthews a little bit in the past, particularly if you go back and look at the 2 episodes we did on covering the National Grand Lodge. He's actually on the flyer. If you go look at the flyer that we use for that also. And so I didn't at the time. I really, to be honest with you, did not know much about William D. Matthews. I basically knew that he was very important in terms of Black Civil War history, and that was basically it as far as that was concerned. And as far as a Mason, I knew that he was a Mason, and I knew that he was very involved with the National Grand Lodge. And to sum up the total of what I kind of had been told about him at the time, I basically figured, he was a bad guy, primarily because he was a very pro National Grand Lodge figure. But there were also other things that I saw in my readings where people had problems with him. But I couldn't really get the specifics on why people felt he was a bad guy. And so in trying to help Miss Swanigan to uncover her ancestors' Masonic history, we later found out that he served as the Grand Master for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas, right? Now, remember earlier I said the colored Masons. I didn't say the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas, right? What I basically figured out was that, and I won't say I was the first person to figure this out, but I wanted to get into the details of it, was that there were actually 2 different Grand Lodges for African Americans back in the 19th century. Okay. The first Grand Lodge being the Most Worshipful King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas, which was subordinate to the National Grand Lodge, and which William D. Matthews was Grand Master of. Okay. And so in uncovering that history and figuring out, because if you look at different sources, I refer you to Joseph Walks's book, Prince Hall Masonic Quiz Book, Harry Williamson's Prince Hall Primer. There's been some confusion in the past over the identity of these 2 Grand Lodges, and you will see some sources that will say that they were one and the same when in fact they were not. Okay, and so in exploring that information more, and of course, like I said, I realized that William Matthews, again, I mean, he was a Grand Master. He shot somebody in the broad daylight. You know, I'm like, what is this, right? What I came to realize later was that what I was actually researching wasn't just the story of William Matthews, and it wasn't just the story of his Grand Lodge even. What I realized I was doing was I actually was finding the history of how Black Freemasonry actually got to what we would refer to as the Wild West or the Old West. Okay. And so that was really the primary thing that really started me down the path of the book. The second thing I'll say, and then I'll, end it, is that that following December, actually December we're almost to the day, December 26th of 2014, a former Prince Hall think tank guest and good friend of ours, Grandmaster Wilbert Curtis. I was in Texas. You know, my better half is from Texas, and her mother doesn't live too far from the most worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas. Now, if you know anything about that jurisdiction, one thing I hope you know is that they have the Wilbert Curtis Library and Museum there in their Grand Lodge, and I really wanted to see it. Grandmaster Curtis made it available the day after Christmas of 2014 so that I could go and check it out. What I did not know was that he was going to be there himself, and I got to do a little tour with him there and whatnot, and I was very appreciative of that. If you go there, or if you've been there, you'll know that there's a picture, or I think there's two pictures of William Matthews and one of his wife there, or I think there's two pictures of his wife too, but there are pictures of him and his wife there in the library, and William Matthews is credited with being the founder or the father of Prince Hall Freemasonry in the state of Texas. And I said, wow, okay, this is cool. You know, I'm already kind of researching the guy, but I wasn't really into writing about him or writing a book or anything. So I said, hey, the jurisdiction of Texas came from the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas. Great. That same day, I got my copy of Brother Robert Uzzle's History of the Jurisdiction of Texas, which I have on the shelf right there behind me somewhere. And I said, great, cool. Where's the history of the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas? I want to know about this. And Grandmaster Curtis told me, he said, honestly, we really don't know anything about that. And I don't think anyone else knows really too much about it. No one had researched it. So after that, I said, you know what? I already got a few clues. I want to know the history of this jurisdiction. And 4 years and 488 pages later, here we are with the Lost Empire.
All right, excellent. So, like you said, it started out with like a question, like so many other things do, and then that question just led to more questions and more answers and more research. Can you talk about that as far as, you know, once you made the determination to write it, what steps did you take and what, you know, process that you go about, and really, you know, if you can delve into the research aspect of it.
Okay, not a problem. Well, I'll say first of all, the thing that I tried to do was I tried to follow up on everything that I could get that was published about William Matthews and King Solomon Grand Lodge from other researchers who had already wrote about them, and what did they say? Why did they say it? I remember, and I can tell you right now, the first time I ever in my life heard of or saw William Matthews' name or his picture or anything was in Brother Alton Roundtree's Out of the Shadows book. And I remember seeing his picture and him talked about in his book on the National Grand Lodge, which he produced, I think, in 2010 or 2011. And so I knew I had those sources. I definitely made sure to check Grand Lodge proceedings, which I think on the think tank, we already talked about researching Grand Lodge proceedings. I wasn't on that episode, but you should still check that out. You know, I made sure to do that. I also made sure to just, you know, I use social media. I asked brothers who had been around longer than myself about this guy, William Matthews, and who was he, and what do you know about him, and what sources do you have? I tried to get all that together first because I wanted to make sure that I was aware of what paths had already been researched on him. And I'll tell you the truth, what I found in some cases disappointed me, to be honest with you, because there were a lot of things that people said about him, but it was a lot of opinions, not really a lot of hard data. Like, for example, what lodge was he a member of, or when did he become a Mason, or, you know, what World Arch chapter was he? I couldn't really find that type of stuff. And his Grand Lodge, I mean, to me, it felt like, and this goes into why the book was named The Lost Empire, because the more I researched, the more I found that, to me, there no one had really looked at him before with any depth until I got a chance to look at Joseph Walks, who, you know, we say it almost every other episode probably. Brother Walks did an amazing job in his time here in the work of Prince Hall Freemasonry with the Phylaxis Society. In the late 1980s, Brother Walks published a paper entitled William D. Matthews, Freemason of Leavenworth, Kansas. And that was, to my knowledge, was probably the first real serious attempt by PHA Mason to really engage in researching Captain Matthews' life. Thankfully, Brother Walks also lived in Leavenworth, Kansas, which is where Captain Matthews ended up kind of setting up shop. He wasn't from there, but that's where he lived most of his life, his adult life. And so in utilizing that source and others, Brother Walks also followed up with a continuation piece, because what happened was in the 80s, when he published it, if you get that issue of the Phylaxis magazine, it's a back issue, William Matthews' picture is on the cover. Well, it went to Brother Alvin Harkless Swiggett, who was I think he was Grand Minister of State at the time for the United Supreme Council Northern Jurisdiction. Well, he actually was a great nephew of William Matthews. So that spawned another piece by Brother Walks on Matthews' family history. So being able to utilize those sources, proceedings, and other things, I said, you know what? I got to figure this guy out. So what I did was I started to dive headfirst into the newspapers of that day in Kansas. And the story that they told about Black Freemasonry during this period in Kansas and the other states, what I began to realize was that this Grand Lodge, a lot of people knew that it was a very strong Grand Lodge and was very dedicated to the National Compact. But what I started to find was the story of it, who were some of the more prominent members. I found what happened with the split of the Compact loyalists and those who broke off to become states' rights, or what we today call PHA. And I realized, I said, wow, this is a real story here. But the thing that continually impressed me, and this will be the last thing I say on this particular thing, the thing that continued to impress me was just how big this Grand Lodge became in such a short period of time, really, because, and I would debate this in court, primarily because of William Matthews being their Grand Master and him utilizing the newly established train systems that were there out west. He was able to create lodges, you know, at an amazing, what I think was an amazing rate. If you get the book, I had Brother Roundtree to write the foreword, and I'll tell you one thing that he said in there, and I'm not saying this to brag, I'm saying this because this is what Brother Roundtree said in the foreword. He said, in so many words, wittingly or unwittingly, that I had uncovered what may be the biggest Black Masonic jurisdiction in the United States during the Reconstruction era. Okay. I called it the Lost Empire in part. And Brother Caffey, I hope you like this. I hope you like it. I really compare it to, I said, well, if the jurisdiction of Ohio was like the ancient Roman Empire, right? Because we know Rome, if you know anything about Roman Empire, it lasted a very long time. Well, to me, the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas would be like, if you know anything about Alexander the Great, his empire was very big, but it didn't last a terribly long time, primarily because it was all centered around one person, being out, in that case, with Alexander the Great, in this case, William D. Matthews. So to understand that Grand Lodge's history, you have to understand his life. And to understand his life, you have to understand his Grand Lodge and his Masonic background. You have to. The book is a history of the Grand Lodge and what happened out west and whatnot, but it's darn near a biography of his life also. So I think that kind of makes it, somewhat unique also. So yeah.
Okay. So I mean, with so much information, and like you had said, that you had started, I guess, trying to collect what was already written, and then you soon discovered some things. What process did you do to cross-reference some of that stuff, especially when you had said that what you found was a lot of it was based on someone's opinion? And the first person that pops in my mind when you talk about opinions and masonry during that time period is, one of my past Grand Masters, William T. Boyd, because he was very opinionated about everything. But what did you do to, I guess, check that and to make sure that it was credible and to make sure that everything that you were that you wrote about was accurate.
Okay, no problem. Well, you know something. To be honest with you, I'm going to share this with you guys. This is how, generally speaking, this is how I try to write history. Whether it's a research paper or this book or whatever, I try to get as much primary source material that I can get a hold of. I literally lay it out on my computer by date, and I try to go one by one by one by one by one by one. Because one thing that I believe in almost religiously is the law of cause and effect. So what I say is, okay, if someone says something bad about William Matthews, in April of 1870, let's just say, well, let me see what was Matthews doing in March or February of 1870 or whatever to spark that comment. Okay. And in many instances, I would say probably almost every instance, I think, at least for myself, if no one else agrees with me, that's fine. But for me, I think I was able to pretty much answer just about everything, every reason. For example, if I saw where someone like J.C. Corbin, who, if you don't know, was a grandmaster out in Arkansas, if I saw where he said, well, Matthews ain't this, or he's this, or whatever, generally speaking, when I started looking at the newspapers and other sources, I generally was able to find where Matthews had done or said something prior to that. And in some cases, he was not the aggressor. In some cases, he was responding to aggression from other Grand Lodges or other things that had happened in his life or whatever. But the thing that really bothered me, and I know that if Matthews was alive today, I think would really bother him, is that people really were not aware of his side of the story of what happened. So when you look at the National Grand Lodge and the states' rights Grand Lodges and that battle and whatnot, Matthews plays a key role in it. And I want to be clear, even though I wrote the book on him, I'll be honest with you, everything that I documented that he did or said, I don't necessarily agree with or endorse, but I understood him better once I put all the facts in line, if that makes sense. Okay. So what do I mean? Let me give you just one example. In 1866, the jurisdiction of Missouri established two lodges in the state of Kansas. Their names were Western Star Lodge and Far West Lodge. They were established by Moses Dixon, and I think we talked about Moses Dixon on the show before. I'm pretty sure we did. If you want to know what episode that was, go back and check in the archive and go find it. But in any case, when they established these lodges, they received a letter from the jurisdiction of Indiana, which basically said, hey, you're invading our territory. The jurisdiction of Missouri says, their Grand Master, H.B. Alexander, basically said, hey, I don't know what you're talking about. There was only one lodge in Kansas that we know of that came from you guys, that was called, which by the way was known as Enterprise Lodge. And as far as Missouri was concerned, they said that lodge had not met for 3 years and was defunct. And he also claimed that the letter that they received, he didn't think it was legitimate because the name of the Grand Secretary was off and the seal was wrong, was the seal of this defunct lodge and all this type of stuff. Well, come to find out, let's do some basic math and just think about this for a second. In 1866, he said that lodge had not met for 3 years, right? Well, let's go back. Very simple. 1866, 65, 64, 63. What was William Matthews doing in 1863? He had organized the first Kansas Colored Volunteer Regiment, which is where he actually got the title of being a captain from, because he was captain of Company D of that regiment, which that regiment was basically was mustered from being a volunteer regiment into being the 79th Kansas Colored Regiment, and some of them became members of the 82nd also. Matthews also served with the Kansas Independent Light Artillery and fought in several major battles of the western part of the Civil War, to include the Battle of Island Mound, Poison Springs. He particularly was noted for helping to save the Battle of at Fort Scott in Kansas. Okay, so these are the things that Matthews would have been doing in the early 1860s during the Civil War. So whether his lodge met or not during that time period, which I think they actually were meeting, I can't necessarily prove it, but I do think that they were meeting. we got to be clear on what was going on during that time period before we place a judgment. And then let me say this other thing. This is something that I don't know that a lot of scholars before this publication came out were aware of. But what I also found was where the lodges came from for his Grand Lodge. Because as I mentioned, you had Enterprise Lodge was there first. That was established sometime in the late 1850s, maybe 1860s, somewhere in there. But I also found two other lodges that came from the jurisdiction of Indiana, which prior to my writing about them, I'm not aware of anybody publishing anything on these lodges, which were named James Sidney Hinton Lodge, number 2, and then you had Mount Moriah Lodge, number 3. All 3 of those lodges hailed from the jurisdiction of Indiana, and then Far West Lodge and Western Star Lodges. Those 5 lodges formed the basis of the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas. So you had 3 lodges from Indiana and 2 lodges from Missouri, from the jurisdiction of Missouri. That's where you get the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas from. But again, if people didn't know about it, and I found this to be kind of interesting, even in the record, people weren't, even in the 1800s and early 1900s, people were not always aware of what was going on with this particular Grand Lodge that I wrote about, for a number of reasons. So it became clearer to me why some people responded negatively to William Matthews or his Grand Lodge, because they just didn't know what. I mean, even in the literature, people knew. When I started researching, I knew plenty of people or plenty of writers who said, well, we know King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas existed, but where did they come from? Who? No one knew. So sometimes when people, and I think it's human nature, sometimes when you don't know, you assume the worst in a person or in a situation when that may not be necessarily be the case. So.
Brother Gillard.
Yeah, that's a couple questions, but usually the saying goes, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." Well, just from reading various proceedings, it just seems like what we now consider Prince Hall Grand Lodges and William Matthews were enemies. And it also seems that John G. Jones and what we now consider Prince Hall Grand Lodges were enemies as well. But normally you would think that since they had a common enemy, that those two would be on the same path, or at least have some type of connection together. But it appears that they didn't.
Right.
So what did you find in your research? Some of the most interesting stories of exchanges between William Matthews and John G. Jones, who, for all intents and purposes, did not like each other at all.
You know, I'm happy you asked that question. I wasn't expecting it, but I'm happy you asked that. Matthews and John G. Jones is actually a really interesting contrast to me, because where John G. Jones and his organization, he basically forsook the idea of being a Mason descended from Prince Hall and the African Lodge Charter, and they basically said, "The heck with that. We're going to do our own thing," and and that's a whole nother discussion. Matthews, on the other hand, really viewed himself and the National Grand Lodge and what he was doing. He really viewed himself as, no, we're the real Prince Hall Masons. We're the real deal, because we're with the National Grand Lodge, and it's the way to go. And and so he governed himself with that. I found in my research, I really believe that the idea of what they say Prince Hall origin, the Prince Hall origin today, he started out saying Prince Hall organization. He would say Prince Hall, and then organization would be with a lowercase o. I found that in my research, which was kind of interesting. And he's saying that in probably 1880s, 1890s, somewhere in there, where I'm seeing that beginning to appear in his writings, maybe a little earlier, actually. But he really viewed himself in his Grand Lodge, and he held Prince Hall and whatnot in high regard. So to get to your question about how their interaction was, I really don't think Matthews respected John G. Jones at all. Matthews was the type of person, from my research, that he was in your face. He wasn't writing. He could write. He definitely wrote. He definitely wrote speeches and stuff like that. But he was like, "Yeah, I'm going to write this letter, but I'm going to hand deliver it to you." Jones being a lawyer and stuff, he was a little more political. And so what you find is in the book, you'll see where if you know John G. Jones, you should know that prior to his expulsion from Prince Hall Freemasonry, he actually organized the 1877 Chicago Convention. Well, Matthews didn't even go. His senior Grand Warden at the time went, but Captain Matthews did not even go. And later on, Jones writes about William Matthews and things that he was doing, particularly in Nebraska and other places. Later on, they actually have an altercation in the 1890s where Jones basically was going out to Kansas in that area to give speeches against Matthews in the National Compact and whatnot. And Matthews has him arrested. Matthews shows up. Matthews, they have a whole back and forth between the two of them. If you want to get more details, you'll find it in the book. But I really think that was really the biggest difference between the two of them, was that one basically said the heck with Prince Hall and Prince Hall Freemasonry and what that's all supposed to be about, where Matthews basically said, no, I am a descendant from Prince Hall, and this is the way it's supposed to be under the National Grand Lodge system. So I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And as I kind of stated on the last show, reading your book, I believe it's going to set the standard for how books should be written about a particular person.
Thank you.
Because reading the book, it kind of it feels like you're watching a movie. You lay everything out. You have some great pictures of some of the people that were involved in William Matthews' life. Seeing as William Matthews is kind of looked at as like a sore eye in Prince Hall Masonry, did you anticipate, or do you, while you was writing, before you, when you was realizing that you were going to publish this book, did you anticipate any type of blowback from the Prince Hall community about this book, since you were a Prince Hall Mason writing on William Matthews, who they view as, who a lot of people view as the enemy?
Yeah, I tried my best to head some of that off, whether it be with my own jurisdiction or with the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas. Of course, you can't make everybody happy, but I want to remind people that it's not really about James Morgan. It's about the sources that I use. Don't argue with James Morgan and be mad at me. Look at the sources. When I say that the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas was established on one particular date, and I say that the King Solomon Grand Lodge was established another date, and I tell you that there are two different Grand Lodges, don't get mad at me. Read the book. Look at what I said. I've used, in terms of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas, I have their original proceedings, which were easy to come by. As far as Matthews himself is concerned, people may be upset about it, and that's okay. But again, I would say look at what he said, look at what I said about him, and whatnot. And if I'm wrong, which I'm fine if someone finds an error or something in there, that's fine. But at the end of the day, he still was a part of our history, as was the National Grand Lodge. The reason why I named the book, I already talked about kind of why I named it The Lost Empire, because of the size, and it was kind of erased from our history, which I hope we get to talk about that part. But the reason why I named it Black Freemasonry in the Old West is because, I thought about, I was thinking about names and whatnot. I could have called it The History of King Solomon Grand Lodge or something of that nature. But in reality, what I realized, and I didn't get to one of my favorite parts about this Grand Lodge's history, what I also came to figure out was that King Solomon Grand Lodge, not only did it exist, but it actually was the mother Grand Lodge of several of our Prince Hall Grand Lodges that exist today in some way, shape, or form. All of the lodges that formed the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Texas were originally chartered from the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas. The jurisdiction of Colorado also has a lineage back through this jurisdiction. Arkansas, one of the three lodges that formed the jurisdiction of Arkansas, came from the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas, and I detail that in the book. So, to try to skirt around it or to not talk about it, to me, really does a disservice to us in the Prince Hall community, because again, how can we say that, well, we like the brothers in Texas or Kansas or wherever else, and then we don't want to talk about the real story of what actually happened back then? To me, that does us all a disservice.
Okay, and hopefully this question is in order.
Mm-hmm.
The book details really kind of like Matthew's life
mm-hmm.
and his involvement in King Solomon Grand Lodge, and you refer to them having an empire.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened to King Solomon Grand Lodge? Does it still exist?
Great question. King Solomon, I focus primarily on the period of 1867 to 1906 because that's the period when Matthews was alive, and the Grand Lodge was established in 1867. Matthews died in 1906, hence the dates. After that, the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas did continue to exist all the way down until about 2005, I believe, and then that's when it actually died. I did find out that there are at least one or two lodges that still exist from that Grand Lodge. Believe it or not, I do know that Far West Lodge number 5, I don't know if it still has the same number or not, but Far West Lodge still does exist to this very day. So this is a lodge that originally came from the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Missouri, went under the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas from 1867 all the way to when that Grand Lodge died in 2005, and it now still exists, to my understanding, under the I believe it's the St. Andrew Grand Lodge of Missouri, which is a PHO or National Compact subordinate Grand Lodge in the state of Missouri. We today may not recognize that body as being a legitimate Masonic lodge or what have you, and that's fine. I'm not necessarily worried about the visitation and all type of stuff, but I do think it's important that we still acknowledge, hey, this is the history of what that is, and it still was very important. At least to me, it is.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. So when it comes to writing, I know sometimes we find like tons of stuff, and we may not include every single detail in what we're writing. I'm just guessing or assuming that you found tons of stuff about Matthews that you didn't include in the book.
Yes, absolutely.
So what was the most important? I mean, the most interesting story, something that just blew your hat away about William Matthews that you did not include in the book?
Oh, easily. I really didn't get into his political life as much. I talked about it, but not as much because I could have easily written a book twice the size. I mean, and like I said, this one is 488 pages. I easily could have done probably another 300 or 400 pages on him just because of his political life. Matthews was very active with the color convention movement. Anytime you had anything going on for Black Civil War veterans, he was there if it was in his region or if he could get there. He actually ran for the state legislature. He ran for public office. And the thing that I think was very, very important, I did touch on this in the book, but I probably could have gone deeper, is the fact that Matthews ran for public office and did not want to accept any money from white philanthropists or white Republicans or anything. He said he only wanted to accept money from other Black people because, in so many words, he felt that politicians are only loyal to those who pay them. So if his community paid him in his campaign and whatnot, then they would have no doubt about his loyalty to the Black community. So one thing that I figured out was not only was Matthews basically this kind of gunslinging Black Masonic cowboy type of person, but he also was very much a race man also, which led him into conflict with another distinguished figure in Masonic history, William T. Boyd. They had two totally different views of how the Masonic order, and I think it partially stemmed from, or largely stemmed from, really their views on like racial politics, if that makes sense. I realized how much of a race man he really was, which I think played into his undying loyalty to the National Grand Lodge ultimately. And I think that even though he and I may not necessarily always agree on those things, I do think that even a broke clock is right twice a day. And there were some things that he said about his views of the National Grand Lodge and what it meant to him that did resonate with me. Maybe not so much as a member of my Grand Lodge per se, but as a Black man in America, I could understand where he was coming from.
Hey, Brother Morgan, I'm sorry. Can you? Because I think that we may have touched on this before when it comes to the National Grand Lodge and that particular viewpoint as far as how some viewed it almost outside of the confines of Freemasonry, meaning that it was good for the race.
Right.
Like given the time period, what was going on, and how some may have looked at or viewed the National Grand Lodge as a vehicle to push the race forward. Because when you just said that, as far as the differences between a Matthews and a Boyd, and then thinking back to some of Boyd's writings and some of the proceedings, yeah, I mean, I could see Booker T. Washington slash um, W.E.B. Du Bois, type of mindset, type of battle,
right.
And thought process. So, I guess, what did you see? Like, did you find that? Did he
absolutely.
really?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Look. One thing that that I in my consultations with Brother Roundtree as I was writing the book, one of the things that Brother Roundtree said that he really was impressed by with my findings was just how many written pieces that Matthews had written that I found, right? Because one of the things that had been said about Matthews by some observers was that he was ignorant, he was crazy, he was all type of things, but that partially because people really have never read Matthews. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'll ask you. You're both, fellow Prince Hall Grand historians. How many speeches by William Matthews are you actually aware of that exist, even if it's just Grand Master addresses? Outside of what I published, what I've sent you guys.
Not that many.
Right, exactly. So, in finding these things, I got into his head a little bit, and to answer your question about him and William T. Boyd, what you find is that Matthews very much his basic argument was, hey, we have a National Grand Lodge. We have an organization of Black men that, we have our money together. We have our central head being the National Grand Lodge with the National Grand Master at the top. We just got out of the Civil War, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why would we want to get rid of that structure just so we could try to fight and beg and plead for this thing of Masonic recognition, which he didn't really have a problem with the idea of recognition from our Caucasian counterparts or anyone else, but he said we should be recognized on our terms. And if this is who we are with the National Grand Lodge, then so be it. And if they don't like it, oh well. That was really William Matthews. To me, that was William Matthews' real message about the National Compact. Versus when you look at Boyd, and this is something, and I think Brother Cafe, I might have called you or asked you about this, but when in reading Matthews, one thing that I realized was that Matthews, and unfortunately we don't have his original papers and whatnot today, but Matthews was very aware of what was going on in other jurisdictions, particularly Ohio. I know he had Ohio's proceedings because he quoted them all the time. He quoted, I think it was in you guys 1874 or 75 proceedings, where William T. Boyd basically told the Caucasian Grand Lodge of Ohio that if they would recognize Black Masons and we had to shut our Grand Lodge in Ohio down and start it over again, or if we had to go under them as a district or whatever they had to do, Boyd was willing to do, even if it meant declaring his own Grand Lodge to be defunct, if it meant that he could be recognized and accepted by the Grand Lodge of Colorado, Grand Lodge of Ohio, primarily Caucasian one. Matthews, I mean, pardon my language, I say this with all due respect, Matthews found that very thought, heretical. He was disgusted by it. He said, wait a second, you're willing to destroy your own organization just to be accepted by these other people who really don't like you in the first place? That didn't make sense to William Matthews, and so while we do talk about the idea of regularity and all that type of stuff, Matthews, I think he understood that. I know he understood it, but he said, no, we're still regular because this is who we are. This is what we've done. And if no one else cares or likes it, oh, well, we're men at the end of the day, and we're going to stand up and be men under the National Compact Grand Lodge. Again, do I necessarily agree with, and I can show you in one of his speeches, I won't tonight, but in one of his speeches, he talked about other Masonic Grand Lodges around the world where he felt those Grand Lodges structure was similar to the National Grand Lodge, and they're considered regular, so why aren't we? Now, again, this comparison that he made to these particular bodies, I don't necessarily agree with his understanding or his interpretation, but I understand what he was trying to say. And again, as maybe not as a member of the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of DC, but as a Black man in America, I can understand where he was coming from. So that's one of those things where, again, it's like on the left hand, there's something you disagree with, but on the right hand, you got a point,
Yeah. I think definitely, and the biggest thing is understanding everything within the time period that it existed and not today.
Right.
To really get that full understanding of it. So yeah, that's very interesting that you discover these characters within the history of our organization and how they interacted, how they butted heads, how they disagreed on certain key aspects
Mm-hmm.
of just existing, and
Right.
you wrap all of that around again the time period in which all of this stuff was going on. I just find it fascinating.
Absolutely, absolutely. And let me say one more thing too about Captain Matthews that I think also really played into his psyche. And I wish that I could have done a little bit more writing on this, but again, I was set out with a certain purpose. Um, I never served in the military at all. Okay, um, but with that being said, I know that that's a life changing experience. Dave, you can probably educate me and all of us way better than I can talk about it, right? But with Matthews having served in the Civil War, there's another book that where Matthews is on the cover, entitled "Soldiers in the Army of Freedom." So you can also check that one out. Also, it doesn't really talk about Matthews as much, even though he's on the cover, but it does talk about his regiment, right? Um, Matthew saw combat firsthand. I think he also saw the vitriol of fighting against the Confederates and whatnot. And I really think that that shaped his worldview of white uh, racism against black people. Now, that's not to say that he hated white people or anything like that, because I found where he actually worked with very closely with white abolitionists like William Lloyd Garrison, Susan B. Anthony, her brother Daniel Reed Anthony, and a number of other people. So I don't think it's necessarily he had something against white people, but I think that he was very skeptical of white racism in America, meaning that he in his mind it was like, hey, we can all be Masonic brothers, but let's be clear about something. Some of y'all are in the Klan. Some of y'all are, you know what I mean? So he was very realistic about that in a way that I don't think that, at least from his perspective, I don't think that Boyd in Matthew's mind understood that. If that makes sense, I think Matthews looked at someone like William T. Boyd and said, "Hey, dude, you just you just happy to be in the room. If I'm going to be in the room, I'm going to be in the room on my own terms, and I'm going to be a man about it." That's again, that's not James Morgan speaking. That's William Matthews speaking.
Excellent, excellent, brother. Yellow, do you have anything else?
I always have tons of questions.
Let me say that, Dave. Let me. I'm sorry to cut you off. Let me just say one thing. I'm going to say this publicly. It's going to be on the record. One of the people who I really look up to in this Masonic history thing is Dave Gillarm. I mean, I look up to everybody, but Dave, I'll be honest with you, Dave. I was scared. You're one of the few people I was scared you was going to get the book. You was going to look at it, be like, James, what'd you do? The fact that you actually like this, I'm so like, that's an honor to me. Because like,
Man.
I'm like, if Dave Gillarm is cool with it, I did something right.
Oh man, now you done threw my thought process off, man.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Hey, I think he did that on purpose too.
Yeah. I definitely appreciate those words, man. That really means something. So now that my thought process is messed up, I'm gonna have to go with a question that I think I asked you before.
Okay.
Like with this one, you hit this out the ballpark.
Thank you.
How do you anticipate on following this up?
Oh man, that's unfair. It's unfair. Everybody keeps asking me that question. I'm definitely looking at doing other, not necessarily something on Matthews, but I do think that one thing I'd like to do from a book perspective is to continue to not just talk about, to talk about Black Freemasonry, but to talk about some of the individual people that that we've discussed already. Maybe someone like a Moses Dixon, or another brother who really, I think, mainstream historians should know more about, but they just don't. And part of the reason why they don't is because there's not a lot on their Masonic lives. And if you understand, and I said it, I think I said it I did say in the book that we talk about all the time about people like Thurgood Marshall and W.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. That's good to say that somebody was a Mason, right? But when you start talking from a scholarly perspective, a scholar is going to say, okay, what does that mean? So what? To me, And Matthews is a perfect example of this. To me, people who are really involved in the Masonic order, be they male or female, they're very active in it, and that's something that's really not just a regular member, but they're like a Matthews, they're Grand Master, heck, a Grand Historian or whatever. It's something that means more to them than just a footnote of, oh yeah, they were a Mason, yeah, they was in such and such lives. That's cool to say. It's nice to share on social media, but in reality, this is a part of their lives. And a lot of scholars do not know. By scholars, I mean non-Masonic scholars, do not necessarily know or recognize or even respect that part of their lives. But to me, you have to be able to do that in order to tell it. So again, and it's no slight against the book I mentioned, but when I read the book, All Men Free and not All Men, Soldiers in the Army of Freedom by Dr. Ian Michael Spurgeon, good book on the Civil War regiment that Matthews helped organize. But he's mentioned in it, I think, 4 or 5 times. If you look in the index, I'm pretty sure that's pretty accurate. But he's on the cover, so you read the book and you don't really learn anything about his life. It does kind of mention that he was a Mason and a little something, but it doesn't talk about the fact that he was an advocate for Black Civil War veterans to get their full benefits. It doesn't talk about the battle that Matthews had to be recognized as a captain, which, mind you, a lot of the independent Grand Lodge, advocates went against Matthews, and so much so to even try to say he wasn't a captain. That's a lie. When he actually was a captain. He had got a commission and everything, but was not fully was not made aware of his full commission because of some political stuff, and because, in my opinion, because the white officers really didn't want a Black man having that much power, right? There's a lot of things that Matthews did that you will not find in a book where he's on the cover of it. Why? Because the person who did it, no respect to him, did not have access to or did not know or recognize the importance of the Masonic order to William Matthews' life. Okay. So again, I wrote a 488-page book on the man, but I could have easily wrote probably another 800 if I had included more about his political life and stuff. So I really hope Masonic biographies kind of become a thing, if that makes sense. I have a very good friend of mine down in Tennessee who's working on some stuff now. She knows what I'm talking about. I'm not even gonna say it. She knows what I'm talking about. That is working on some things like that also. I know your book. You're talking about From Sims to James. I know you're talking about a span of grandmasters. But again, to talk about their lives. Why was John Wesley Dobbs so important? Why was H.R. Butler so important? And what makes, to me, that's something that I want to try to emulate as well going forward, regardless of who I end up talking about.
Yeah, and why and since we've been thinking about while you were talking about that, I was doing some thinking. I think my follow up after Sims to James was done. There's one book written about John H. DeVoe.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I didn't know that.
Yes, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
But in the book, there's so many different chapters that have nothing to do with John H. DeVoe at all.
Right.
It does give you a picture of what Black life was like in Savannah,
mm-hmm.
and it has some very interesting details regarding Black slave owners that were brought into Savannah,
right,
just for the purpose of owning slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So there was some very interesting details in this book. But as far as the stuff that John H. DeVoe was doing, he was Grand Master. I mean, this dude was like 27, 28
right.
when he was Grand Master.
Right.
That's kind of unheard of.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing, some of the stuff that he was doing in his life is not even mentioned.
Right.
So I think that may be a follow up, and probably the third edition is going to be on my favorite, William Terry.
Right.
I think I can do that one before John Wesley Dobbs, because you can write 10,000 books on Dobbs' life. Absolutely.
And on that note too, I mean, I'm not sure how many people actually want to buy it outside of maybe my family. I am looking at trying to write a little small booklet or something, maybe just for my family, on Reverend W.J. Hightower, who we talked about on my on the AME church episode that we did a while back. And I mean, the only reason I'm really bringing that up is to also mention the fact that my third great grandfather got in an argument with the first worship master of Dave's Lodge. I'm never gonna let that go. That they had a fight and my grandfather won. So I'm never gonna. I'm gonna bring it up every chance I get. That's the only reason why I brought that up. But to make a long story short, I think that see what you just said is another perfect example. We have to tell the stories of our leaders from our perspective and talk about why the Masonry and the Eastern Star and whatnot. Why was it important to them? What was it that made this so attractive an organization? And what was it? What were the things that they actually did in those positions of leadership? To me, and look, I'm not even gonna lie to you. I don't necessarily consider myself to be an expert on the Old West or anything like that. Not even having written the book, but I will say this: for my money, I think William Matthews might have been one of the most influential Black men in the Old West that most people aren't even aware of. Most people don't even know or recognize the type of power for him to be the Grand Master. And I'm not just talking about in Masonry. I'm talking about outside of it. For example, one of the things that, again, I know I touched on in the book, but I probably could have gone a little deeper on, was just how much work he did to make sure Blacks, were getting jobs, working on the railroads and other aspects, which was a big deal back at that time, out west, to work on the Transcontinental Railroad, that was something, and so when you think about it, his jurisdiction at one point extended from Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, and he had a lodge in Arkansas, down into Texas. I mean, for him to be able to organize people at that large territory, to me, was a feat in and of itself, to be honest with you.
Yeah. And while you was thinking about the first, while you was mentioning the first worship master of my lodge, I just realized that Reverend George Wesley Allen actually connects all of us on the think tank.
Is that right? How so?
He was the first worship master of my lodge, but he lived in Alabama, where Ken's membership is.
Right.
He gets into argument and works on several committees with your third great grandfather.
Right.
So that connects him to you, and he's buried in Ohio.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, that means we're gonna have to do. We might have to do a George Wesley Allen episode or something. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, Brother Gillar, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't have anything else.
Brother Morgan, I just the biggest question that's being asked by everyone is, where and when can they get the book?
I'm happy you asked that question. Everybody been asking me. I got phone calls this week from New York to Ohio to California and back, asking me about it. Well, because I haven't told anybody, right? So y'all want to know, right? Well, the book will be available for purchase this Friday on Lulu.com. Lulu is the publisher. I self-published the book myself, right? So that's redundant, right? Self-published by myself. Yeah, but in any case, the book will be available on Lulu.com. All you have to do is go on there, search The Lost Empire. It'll pop right up. I will make sure that it is posted in the Prince Hall Think Tank group. Also, if you follow me on social media, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and what have you, will be there also as well. I'll make sure you guys get the link and everything. The book will be this book right here will be $50. It's a dust jacket and everything like that. So I pray you guys will support it. I also now this is the deluxe edition, so to speak. And then I also have, hold on one second. I got something on top of it. I apologize. I also have this is the same book. This is the standard edition. It's just only difference is the cover. This is a case wrap, but it's the same book. This will be $40, and then this will be $50 here with the dust jacket and what have you. So pick your poison. But it will be available on Lulu, and I will also be making sure I share it, as much as possible, everywhere else also, so people can get a copy of it. And I appreciate all the support, all the positive feedback from everybody, and the negative, and if you find something wrong with it, or something you have a question about, hey, let me know. I'm happy to look at it and whatnot. Part of the reason why I think that publication of research is important is because the thing about it is that when you put something out on writing and it's there on the record, you have to live by it, you have to die by it. And sometimes you have to say, hey, maybe I was wrong. So if you find something wrong with it, hey, that's fine. I'm human. But at the end of the day, I spend a lot of time and energy and money on putting this book out there. And I hope that everybody enjoys it regardless of, even if you don't just find something you disagree with, I hope you enjoy the read through, because I really think it's a remarkable story, not just necessarily from the Masonic aspect, but even just as a Western, talking about Captain Matthews' life and whatnot. It really, and I have to say this. I wasn't going to, but I have to say this. If you ever get a chance to read Joe Walks's article on William Matthews that I talked about earlier, at the end of it, Walks talks about how when he went to Captain Matthews' grave, he stood at attention and saluted him, because if you know anything about Brother Walks, he was a military man like Captain Matthews. I went from not knowing very much about him. Again, like I said, I knew he was a Civil War veteran and was important in that aspect. I knew he was a part of the National Grand Lodge situation, and that I had basically been taught that he was a bad guy. But after doing all this research and whatnot on his life, I'll admit, and I wrote it in the book, that when I went to his grave, which by the way, Joe Walks is buried in the same cemetery as William Matthews is out in Leavenworth. When I first went to Captain Matthews' grave, after having done all this research and whatnot, I admit that as a man, even though I never served in the military and whatnot, and to some degree, I'll be honest with you, to some degree, as a Mason, I had to salute him as well. Not necessarily because I agree with everything he did or everything he said or everything he believed in, but for the things that he did do that were important. There are a lot of, we haven't had Brother Curtis Black on in a while, but if you didn't have a William Matthews to establish the lodges in Texas, we might not have a Brother Curtis Black or Wilbert Curtis who've been on the show. You might not have, some of our other brothers and sisters out in those Western states who in some way, shape, or form come from up under him, whether they know it or not. And so if for no other reason for that, I had to kind of just give him a little, hats off to him for the good things that he did do that I appreciate. And even some of the things that maybe I don't appreciate, but I respect the fact that he was dedicated to what it was that he believed in. I'm surprised we've gone this long and we haven't talked about the National Grand Lodge situation, but even with that, I really think that he was, even if I disagree with him regarding how that whole thing broke down, I respect his dedication and his sincerity.
Excellent. So we're at the point in the show where, like I said, that was literally the most posted question that we had from the audience. Was as far as purchasing the book. So there you have it, brothers and sisters. Friday, the book will be out. They'll be available for purchase. So please, once that information is posted by Brother Morgan, please go out and support that good brother and read what sounds like a very, very interesting tale that I'm sure we'll have to do a follow-up episode in the future. Once everyone that got the book, read it, and it may produce some good questions, and we could do a follow-up on as well. So, parting and closing thoughts from brothers. Brother Morgan, since it was primarily on you this evening, any parting words?
My parting words would be this: is that I would encourage brothers and sisters, especially if you're a longtime Prince Hall think tank community member, don't just read this book and put it down and put it on the shelf and set it aside. But I hope that you, if nothing else, that maybe you find some inspiration to write your own book or books or documentary or what have you about some Masonic history, or anything else for that matter that you think is important that people don't necessarily know about. One of the things that I am a big believer in is that when I find something that no one else that I think that they should have, that's when I try to write and publish it. And so I want to really encourage brothers and sisters to get out here and publish. And if you need some tips or advice, holler at us, let us know, because these are things that need to be out there. And I'm very big on us putting stuff on the shelves, because it's great for us to come on here and talk about, oh yeah, brothers from way back when did this and brothers from way back when did that. Well, now you guys can see. If you go back and watch some of the older episodes of the show, you'll see where I was researching Matthews or the Bruce family or whatever. And I kind of talked about it, hinted at it in the past, and now you guys seeing it come into fruition. It took me 4 years, like I said, but we made it there. And so know that you can do that too. And I encourage you to do it. Matter of fact, I charge you to do it, because if we don't do it, the question is, who will?
Indeed. Brother Gillard?
Yeah, it's definitely light, and I'm definitely gonna be getting my copy on Friday. But reading through the manuscript, I mean, it's very well put together. It was an excellent book.
Thank you.
So if you don't have this on your shelf, and we and for the brother that was on the last show, he posted about Samuel T. Daniels' wax statue. I can't remember who it was. Whoever you was that posted on the YouTube chat about that statue, contact me back channel. For the contest, brother DeMaggio Smith won it hands down. The statue of past Grandmaster Shepherd.
Right.
Yeah. That he won it hands down. For everybody else, there were at least 2 other people. You're gonna be receiving something as well. I'm gonna contact you back channel about that. But DeMaggio Smith, you're gonna get a copy on me as well. For other things, I know I'm probably gonna get some hate mail about this. I'm gonna say it anyway. Shout out to the New Orleans Saints tonight for beating the Steelers. I really appreciate y'all for doing that. I didn't say it during the pre-show, but that's what took me so long to get on, because I was downstairs watching the game. I had to make sure that the Saints beat the Steelers tonight. So definitely, I appreciate them for doing that, and for all. I know I'm gonna get some hate mail. I don't care. I'm a Knicks fan. And you see right here, I'm repping Knicks, so I'm not worried about comments from anybody. But,
Dave is a fan of every clandestine sports team.
Right.
But thank you all for just your support over the years. This has been another great season of the Prince Hall Think Tank. And as we move forward to our next season, we're gonna count on you, continue to count on you for your continued support. So just thank you, and we'll be seeing you next year.
Indeed. Thanks, brothers. And it's been a custom, and it's something that I'm proud of on the think tank that we do. We always want to highlight the writings of our brothers. So, we appreciate definitely the time and the effort, that they put into researching, as I said earlier, and just writing, because it's a big undertaking. And, they don't do it for the money. They do it for the love of the craft and to get the information out. So again, we'll always continue to highlight those brothers and hopefully sisters that will are putting these books out. If you think about it, and Brother Morgan touched on it a little bit earlier, we're really entering into an interesting time period right now where we have these authors putting out books that, about certain people or things or historical points within Freemasonry that we've all been brought up to believe in, but new research is producing new evidence. And we really, really have to open ourselves up to those new things. I think there's been a fear that some of this research is somewhat trying to question the for whatever reason the legitimacy of Prince Hall Masonry thing, and I don't see that as that's established, so that's not going to go anywhere. Right. But there are some things within the story that at one point in time in history, because we always talk about Grimshaw, and I'm when it comes to Grimshaw, I'm of the firm belief that he definitely screwed us up a little bit when it comes to certain things. But I do question the time period, what was available to him, and what he chose to write about.
Brother Cav, can I jump in that real quick?
Go ahead, bro.
My apologies. One thing I will say on Grimshaw, because I do talk about Grimshaw to some extent, to a large extent in the book. One of the reasons why I called the Lost Empire, and you have to think about, well, who lost it and why was it lost? My theory about a lot of the things that Grimshaw wrote about, I think that he purposely tried to write the National Grand Lodge out of our history. And I think that William Matthews and King Solomon Grand Lodge were very inconvenient for a lot of stuff that he wrote. And so they were literally written out of his history. And that's one of the reasons why people did not know about this lost empire, which has now been found.
Right.
I'm saying it here publicly. If you want to find out why I'm saying that, get a copy of the book, check it out, get a copy of Grimshaw's book, and you'll see.
Right. And it's that, I mean, it's that, like, it's just, we're discovering these things now, and it'd be wrong for us to sit on the information or just to sweep it up under the rug. So, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, that we're discovering all of this great new information. On the other hand, it's challenging a lot of old stories. And the biggest thing, is that's okay. Right. That's okay. That's what research is supposed to do. I think Brother Morgan put it perfectly. You get the information, you verify it, and then you just put it out there. And then if there's and then if you don't agree with it, fine. If you have something, if you discover something, put it that counters that, just put it out there. That's the whole purpose of research, and we all benefit from that. When that's taking place, we've had periods of time where we've had an Arthur here, Arthur there, a researcher here doing that. But right now, it's in my opinion, it's a great time to be a Prince Hall researcher, because we have a lot of people doing a lot of great research. So I'm sure in the upcoming months and years, you're going to start seeing a lot of great information put out there from a lot of people, and the think tank hopefully will be here to give those folks a platform to present their information and get it out there for everyone. So again, it's been a great year on the think tank. I'd like to personally thank Brother Morgan, Brother Collins, and Brother Gillarm for once again being great panelists, but more than that, being great brothers. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and everything with everyone. And also too, I'd like to also thank our viewers. Your thoughts, words of encouragement, and contributions have truly made this a great show, and for that, I'm deeply indebted to you. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we hope you gained a little insight, and we hope you join us for future broadcasts of the Prince Hall Think Tank. Have a good evening, and remember, let's teach Masonry in our lodges. Good evening.
Take care, everybody.